especially.
Namaskar, I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Welcome to the special presentation. People of United Kingdom have returned Boris Johnson to power by a thumping majority to the Conservatives. Conservatives and Labour Party have scored their best and worst performances in decades. And in this special presentation, we'll delve deeper into what this win imply for the United Kingdom, Brexit and other challenges, and what the UK election results mean for India. In the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative Party has been declared victorious after winning 365 seats in the general elections. The party now has a majority of 650 seats in the 650 seats of House of Commons. It's the largest since 1987. With all votes counted, the Labour Party has won 203 seats. Scottish Nationalist Party SNP has won 48 seats. Conservatives have made gains in Labour heartlands across northern England and Wales. The SNP have made gains across Scotland. Prime Minister Johnson said he hopes his party's extraordinary victory will bring some closure to the Brexit debate and let the healing begin. For the Indians watching this election closely, 15 Indian origin candidates have won their seats.
Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson secured a massive victory, beating Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn in the UK's general election on Friday, as voters stood by his promise to get Brexit done and take the country out of the European Union by 31st January next year. The Conservative Party won 364 of Parliament's 650 seats in the lower House of Commons. Giving a speech outside 10 Downing Street, Prime Minister Boris Johnson urged his country's people to let the healing begin.
As we work together with the EU, as friends and sovereign equals, in tackling climate change and terrorism, in building academic and scientific cooperation, redoubling our trading relationship, I frankly urge everyone on either side of what are, after 3.5 years, after all, an increasingly arid argument, I urge everyone to find closure and to let the healing begin. Because I believe, in fact I know, because I've heard it loud and clear from every corner of the country, that the overwhelming priority of the British people now is that we should focus above all on the NHS. That simple and beautiful idea that represents the best of our country.
Boris Johnson was given a hero's welcome as he returned after the Queen's permission to form a new government. Other than the grand welcome, British Prime Minister received wishes on his great win from leaders across the world. Prime Minister Narendra Modi extended his congratulations and said that India looks forward to strengthening ties between the two countries. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also took to Twitter to congratulate Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Meanwhile, showing their desire to move ahead with the business of Brexit, the leaders of the European Parliament and Council leaders have welcomed the results of UK election. Opposition Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn said he did not want to go quickly after Labour suffered its worst election result since 1935 and that he was prepared to remain leader until the party chooses a successor next year.
Obviously very sad at the result we've achieved and very sad at those colleagues that lost their seats in the election, but I am quite prepared, and I was elected to do so, to lead the party until that takes place. I think the responsible thing to do is not to walk away from the whole thing, and I won't do that. I will stay here until there has been somebody elected to succeed me, and then I will step down at that point.
This election victory is the party's biggest since Margaret Thatcher captured a third term in 1987. Supporters of Conservative Party celebrated the win of their leader across the country. Bureau Report, DD India.
And we'll now talk about the implications of this big clear win that Boris Johnson has secured in the UK. And joining me in this discussion is a special guest, Professor Sriram Chaulia, international affairs expert. Welcome, sir, to our studios. Now, a clear win really for Boris Johnson. How do you see the people of UK have voted, the themes on which they have expressed their opinions? What would you say, Well,
Shubhendu, I think first of all, this landslide victory for the Tories
was achieved by breaking the so-called red wall of the Labour Party. And this meant, the industrial heartlands, Midlands and the north of England, which traditionally had been the bastion for trade unions and for workers, and on the basis of which, the Labour Party, which represented the old left, was able to, keep winning in those areas. They were like bastions. But this time Boris Johnson smashed it, as he said it. And I think a part of this has to do with appropriating some of the anti-austerity and the welfare-based appeals, and he's been able to do that by promising more social spending to end the era of austerity completely, which earlier conservative leaders had done, like David Cameron and Theresa May. And then he also promised more on housing, on schools, on policing, right. So that was made a difference. But the second part was, of course, a lot of the working class in the UK, which used to be with the Labour, switched because of Brexit, and Johnson was like the symbol to say, I'm going to get it done come what may. And because a lot of working class people are anxious about migration, right. and opposing migration was one of the bases on which Johnson could attract votes, because his whole agenda of Brexit was always on the basis that we are separate from the European Union, we are going to get out, and then we will be sovereign and we can control our borders and stop this mass immigration especially from Eastern Europe. Right. So these kind of themes resonated. So apart from the free market and the traditional upper class sections of British society who always are vote Tory, this time I think the working class was one of the additional reasons why they surged so much, and they could really create this cross-class coalition that took them far beyond the required majority.
Right, and we'll talk about that Brexit aspect in detail in just a bit. Let me introduce you to the second guest in the studio with us, Dr. Jamini Bhagwati, former ambassador to UK and EU. Welcome, sir. Good evening.
Good evening to you.
Did the results surprise you in any manner? How do you see the results that came in the UK elections? Clear majority for the Conservatives, Boris Johnson, Prime Minister again.
The results did surprise me in the sense that I expected Liberals to do a little better. The Liberals had made it quite clear that they are not in favor of Brexit, but I don't think they got their message across. Right. I mean, they kind of fell between stools. When you are, it's not a good thing to say you're against Brexit. You have to say, what are you for?
But they're like everywhere. They were saying that if the referendum on the deal works out, we'll go for Brexit. If not, perhaps we'll do a referendum on the idea of Brexit all over again. So they gave too many options for the people, and people were looking for solutions.
Something clear-cut.
Something clear-cut.
You could give a solution, but as long as it is clear and easy to understand for a voter.
Right.
They were too sophisticated in a way in which they approached the issue, and that doesn't work for the average voter.
Right.
So that's why they bombed, and as you know, the Liberal leader lost her own seat.
That's right.
So that was, I think it's unfortunate the way everything has panned out. I think it's unfortunate for UK.
And Professor Chowli, I'll come back to you again. Talking about Brexit now, Brexit really was at the heart of these elections. Many say the elections really happened because the Brexit, there was no way out of the logjam. Since 2016, when the referendum vote happened, do you think the atmosphere, the environment in UK is most conducive now for perhaps a smoother Brexit ahead?
Yeah, at the end of, as Johnson said in his victory speech, this is supposed to bring some closure to this, limbo, open-ended limbo that was going on for 3 years, total uncertainty and chaos. And
he talks of healing. He talks of
of course, because the social polarization and the divisions, extreme social divisions, but they still exist. The point is that if you do the tally of the parties and who got what, again, it's roughly around half of the parties that have supported Brexit have won seats, and then the other half are the ones who have opposed it. But nonetheless, what he has now is control over Parliament, because the Parliament logjam was one of the reasons why they were unable to proceed with unanimity. So at least, if not in the general public, at least in the House of Commons now, Johnson has a mandate to be able to finally sign that Brexit deal with the Europeans and get out. But then what happens after that is the real question, because what kind of relationship the UK has with the continental Europe is has to be
The
again negotiated.
Post-Brexit scenario.
The deal, and that they have set a deadline for December 2020. So to some extent, some of the uncertainty remains, but the major part, initially people were not even sure whether or not Brexit will happen. Now I think it's clear cut. The mandate that Johnson has is to implement Brexit, and that's happening. Whether some people like it or not, at least to that extent, they are forging ahead.
Right, Ambassador Bhagwati. In the context of Brexit again, how significant are these results, do you see? And what are the challenges that remain? I mean, we understand that Mr. Johnson now has the majority in the parliament. He's got a clear mandate, but what challenges remain as far as Brexit is concerned? Well, that's what this whole election was spanned around.
See, the entire challenge of Brexit is ahead. I mean, this is an internal UK matter. Whether they will go for Brexit or not.
But the deal that was stuck in the UK Parliament for a long time,
you see, you're too focused, if I may say so, on what is happening internally to UK. UK is a large country.
Yes.
It's an important country, but the European Union as a whole is much bigger.
Certainly.
So the European Union, and they will, the remaining part of it, because now it's very clear, as was just mentioned, that Brexit will happen, but you have 11 months to negotiate. Exactly how will you negotiate? There is, for just to speak of one small element, I think there is some demand by the European Commission that UK owes some, I don't know, I can't remember now whether it's 31 billion pounds or euros or 34 or whatever, something over 30, something below 40. The UK of course says no. Now, how exactly will goods move? How will people move? There's the whole issue of Northern Ireland. Will you draw a line in the sea? How will Scotland react? Have you seen how Scottish National Party has almost swept all the seats in Scotland? Will they ask for another referendum for Scottish independence? And whether they want to remain within EU? This is just an internal exercise that Mr. Boris Johnson will be the next Prime Minister.
And Ambassador, what would you say, what does this Conservative win, a clear win, mean for India?
No, for us,
other implications.
For us, the UK is an important country, and it's useful for us that there is a clear-cut victory for one party, and one leader's now role as Prime Minister is very clear.
Right.
So that is good. So you know exactly who to talk to. We have an important trading relationship with the UK as well as of foreign direct investment. For instance, just to give a number, I think we export somewhere around 9.3 billion US dollars worth of goods, goods mind you, and they export to us somewhere around 7.6 billion. So we have a favorable balance of trade with the UK. As you know, for the last 60 years, we've always had an adverse balance of trade in goods when you take the world as a whole. And then even in foreign direct investment, I think the UK is an important partner. So to that extent, having clarity in the domestic political situation in the UK makes it easier for whether it is our Commerce Ministry, Finance Ministry or other ministries to discuss the
we're also key
engagement.
investors in the UK. We're among the top 3 investors in the UK as well.
Yeah, that's a very strange situation for a country which is not rich in capital in terms of we don't want to be too aggressive in investing outside. As you know very well, the Chorus steel plant investment by the Tatas is an absolute disaster. It loses £1 million a day. The Jaguar investment was much better. But the Chinese demand for Jaguars is down, and to that extent even Jaguar Land Rover is not doing all that well. So we won't go down into specific examples because some things work well, some things don't. But I would submit that UK will remain an important economic partner, both in terms of investment both ways as well as for trade. I hope that we can do more on technology, but I will elaborate if you so wish.
We'll come to that too. Professor Choli, I'll come to you. Another ways in which I'd like to talk further about the significance of these elections for India. 15 Indian origin candidates have done very well. Some of them have got re-elected. So Preeti Patel, the former Home Secretary, has also won the election. How do you see the significance of that? How do you interpret Indian origin candidates doing well in the UK elections. What signals are we reading there?
Shubhendu, we have a large diaspora there.
Certainly.
As you know, our Prime Minister Modi has often done real, showpiece events in the UK.
In UK, it's the largest minority ethnic
it is, and highly
Indians.
educated and prosperous one, like in the US. So I think they've got clearly a lot of, they've sunk into the British fabric and have been making major contributions. Some of these names you're mentioning are prominent conservatives. What is interesting, it seems, is that the electorate also, the voters seem to have switched, because traditionally more Indian British Indians used to vote more for Labour, but
That's
it does look like because of some unsavory statements by Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, about Kashmir and about Article 370.
Right.
I think Indian nationalists within the UK were upset about it. So I think in a way we have indicated that when it comes to national interest, we are far more organized there. And although there is an anti-immigrant element to this Brexit camp and to Boris Johnson's right-wing populism, on the other hand, he's been talking about points-based immigration system and such things, which may actually benefit higher skilled migrants from India. Now, if you take the scenario of Brexit, the projection is that the moment the Polish and the Dutch and the Germans are on a different footing in the UK after Brexit, because it's no longer part of the common market, they may have to leave, and there has already been a bit of an exodus of businesses and professionals. So they will need, and Boris Johnson is promising massive opening the spigot on spending for hospitals and for such things, and they will need a huge influx of doctors and nurses. So possibly Indians, skilled Indians may again be looked up for free movement in terms of high skilled migration. So there may be some opportunities coming up. Even the education sector, they may help reduce the fee for tuition for students and such things. So overall, I think, but nonetheless, one fact remains, which is that earlier our investors there would use the UK as a gateway for the rest of the Europe, which is a much bigger market. And now if that closes, or it's all now pending, because until they get zero customs and zero tariffs again negotiated with the EU as a separate entity, we are not guaranteed that if we manufacture in the UK, there will be no tariffs for us to send to Germany or to France or Spain. So therefore, we may also our businesses may also have to think about relocating to the continent, or having at least a second leg there, which many other global companies are doing. So in that sense, the UK's importance, as Dr. Bhagwati is saying, UK's overall importance as a trading partner is reduced for us, because it's only 80 million people we're talking about, not 500 million, and UK being a stepping stone to the rest of them. So there will have to be some adjustment. The conservatives, the pro-Brexiteers have been saying this Brexit, once we get it done, it's going to make us free and sovereign, and we're going to have trade deals, bilateral trade deals, including with India and with the US, and it's going to be all milk and honey. I think that's a bit of an oversell. There will be a struggle, there will be an adjustment. Overall, I agree that it will portend a decline for Britain, because as it was part of a larger entity, it could punch above its weight, but now in many ways it's being downsized, and so we will also have to adjust our expectations about the UK.
Right. Dr. Bhagwati, again on that aspect, in the manner in which the debacle for the Labour Party has been witnessed, the issue that Professor Chawla just mentioned, that certain comments, certain stand that Jeremy Corbyn, that the Labour Party had taken vis-a-vis India, issues like Kashmir, do you think that in a great manner backfired for the Labour, with lost its traditional voters to the Conservatives?
No, I think.
Do you think that pattern has happened?
I think we should not focus too much on the internal politics of UK. What you are suggesting, I think, is that people of Indian origin, not Indian citizens, because if they were Indian citizens, we don't have dual nationality, then they can't vote. So I would suggest that we should be somewhat clear that they are British nationals. And their first and their last
they do take a stand. They do take a stand.
They do take a stand, but let's not get emotional about people of Indian origin. They have chosen to move,
because the shift is quite historic.
Even I think it's a lot to do with Mr. Corbyn. not to, in terms of his policies.
Okay.
I wouldn't worry too much about what he said,
Okay.
because he's one leader in UK. We are a large country. We should be self-assured enough not to worry about what Mr. Corbyn said about Article 370, and to that extent,
But
people
we're
of
trying
Indian-
to decode what may have gone wrong, but I understand the point
I think
that you mentioned.
he ran an absolutely sort of, what should I say, a campaign which was doomed to failure, because he takes extreme left positions,
Yeah.
which in the UK don't sell well. The average British person feels that this kind of extreme left position on economic issues is not something they feel comfortable about. And plus, I don't know whether you are aware that after Tony Blair, the way the Labour leader is chosen, the trade unions have a very large hand in it.
Hand in that, yeah.
And he felt very comfortable, because it is impossible for any moderate Labour leader today to come to the surface and become a leader of the Labour Party.
Right.
So now this is something which is internal to Labour. They need to rethink how will they have intra-party elections to allow a somewhat more moderate person like Tony Blair. I mean, Tony Blair, Chilcot inquiry, and
I get
there
that,
are all
right,
kinds of
right.
things about the Iraq war.
Right.
But I'm saying somewhat more moderate in their economic views. How would
Right.
you?
And Professor Chaulier, coming to the road ahead, if we talk about for Johnson, for Boris Johnson, we've talked about Brexit. If we talk about public welfare, NHS, National Health Scheme was discussed quite passionately during the campaign. That would be one of his priorities. He speaks about that in his first speech after winning the elections.
Yeah, Shubhendu, it's a historic role reversal. I mean, the Tories generally were supposed to be for small government since Margaret Thatcher, and now Johnson is promising a kind of an expanded welfare state, and that's why he got the working class votes.
Right.
One of the reasons, I think. So they will actually go for deficits, but the question is, what does that do to the bond markets? Because the financial center is London, right? The city of London, and they would not want, excessive state spending that may deter investors and for financial flows to happen. They want more, pro free market, pro laissez-faire. But Johnson won the votes on the basis of, taking the working class along, and healing the rifts, and in many ways addressing the anti-globalization sentiments that have emerged among the have-nots,
Right.
who have been left behind in the countryside. I mean, if you look at the vote also, Labour still managed those 200 seats or so they still got were largely from urban centers, where there were these, liberal-minded social liberals from relatively prosperous communities. But then the working class deserted them. So it's going to be a difficult balancing act between these multiple factions which have voted for this new government. He will have to show some balance. So to that extent, I think he is constrained. But on the other hand, the parliamentary majority goes for him. The Westminster model, which we also have adopted in India, gives a lot of authority to prime ministers who have got a clear majority.
Right.
So to that extent, I think he will forge ahead with a new direction, which is a kind of right of center rather than far right, which was his initial entry into politics. Johnson never really stood for a single thing, but now he is going to, I think, shift a little bit to the left of where he was earlier, because that's where the bulk of the voters are, and he will want to use these 5 years, the clear mandate, to fulfill those promises, but at the same time curb immigration, because that's been the issue which has been roiling the working people.
Dr. Bhagwati, on immigration, I'd like to come to you. As and when the Brexit happens, and Conservatives had said that once Brexit happens, EU and non-EU immigrants would be treated at par. And again, if we look at it vis-a-vis India, Indian immigrants and EU immigrants will be treated at par. How would that development pan out for UK and EU and for India? How do you see that immigration aspect in particular to be watched out for in the coming days?
As has been already mentioned by my co-panelists, I think one of the issues which was of concern to the average voter, not the elite in London, was this issue of people from Eastern Europe, the EU countries which joined much later, like Poland and Romania and so on, people from there coming and working for lower wages than people in England would have worked for. To that extent, immigration will remain an important issue. And I think when we look at high-skilled labor, that would be perhaps more acceptable. But let's think about ourselves first. I mean, the National Health Service, 65% of the doctors are from South Asia. That by South Asia, I mean Pakistan. What is today Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and so on.
Right.
Now, if you look at the total population of India and divide by the number of doctors, it is a very, very sad story. Our doctor to population ratio is one of the worst in the world, including among developing countries. Now, are we really in a position? I'm not saying we are a democracy, we are an open society, people can and should go wherever they want, but we need to keep our skilled, highly skilled people at home. So we need to create the employment opportunities at home to keep our best talent and our best people, particularly in the technical spheres, so that we can generate through them employment opportunities at home.
Right. And Professor Jolia, you wanted to add something?
I just wanted to add a non sequitur actually, but it's about the the ethnic dimension in the UK. The Scottish and Northern Irish that was already mentioned earlier. See, that's going to significantly weaken the UK as well. Because what happens from now onwards, this is like England, the heart of England. You look at the map; it's blue all the way until Scotland, and then it is completely yellow, which is the
Scottish
secessionist
party.
So they are going to push for another referendum. Last time the referendum a few years ago, it was 45% to remain to break away and 55% to remain in the UK. But now after Brexit, you see, it's quite likely that they'll win a majority. So there is a potential that, like Catalonia and Spain, there's going to be a constitutional crisis. People demanding a referendum but not getting it. Johnson is never going to concede, and then the old demons of English colonialism over the Scottish, and Scottish sub-nationalism, all these are going to emerge. The Northern Irish border question remains. So I think, you see, one way of looking at it is the democratic will of the people, Shubhendu. People have voted, this is the majority, and Brexit has to happen. The other way of looking at it is the union that has held for centuries and which used to be once a great empire has now come to such a pitiable condition that it's likely to end up being just a little England.
The integrity of
no
UK
longer Great
is
Britain
going to
anymore.
be
And they're saying we'll be global Britain, but I feel that if it is now weakened significantly, its bargaining position on trade deals with Trump, for example, who's very aggressive on these, is I think quite low. So I think overall they will have to manage a lot of these fissiparous tendencies and breakaway regions now, which means that the UK is not in a position really to be a major leader. Although they have a seat in the UN Security Council, they still have a strong defense force. They've got Diego Garcia and other British Indian Ocean territories on which they want to cooperate with us, and we are happy to do that. But I think overall its ability to really shape the European or the transatlantic narrative has weakened.
Right, and final thoughts, Dr. Bhagwati. You've been a career diplomat. Do diplomats discuss one election against coming up big elections internationally? I mean, US elections are coming up next year. I mean, there were some analysis which said that the Democrats have much to learn from what has happened in the UK. I mean, do you see any pattern that is there?
I think the US is somewhat different. They have been hit hard because not only have I served as the Indian High Commissioner in London as well as India's ambassador to the European Union, I have also worked for about 11 years in the World Bank in Washington, D.C. as a financial sector specialist. And my understanding, and I've also studied in the US, so my understanding of that country is that it's far, far more open than the UK.
More complex,
To that extent, as Joseph Stiglitz has mentioned in his book, Globalization and Its Discontents, Mr. Trump, President Trump, has been able to take advantage of that discontent because by being more open, so therefore they let in more goods and services and people. Now, coming year, that is 2020, towards the end is when the elections will take place.
Very briefly, sir, because we're just running out of time.
So I'm not quite sure where it will go, whether Mr. Trump will come back or not. And what it means for India is that we need to keep our options open. And last thought, because the UK is still a P5, a permanent member of the Security Council, somebody should think about...
Absolutely, but there's still a year to go. I think we'll have time to discuss on that. Gentlemen, on that note, thank you very much for joining us in the studio and giving us all those insights. So Boris Johnson, big win for him. He becomes Prime Minister again. Let's see how the road ahead is going to be for him, how Brexit pans out, how the other challenges pan out. And on that note, we'll conclude this special presentation. Namaskar.